we launched our climate change campaign, we published this, the climate calendar. The aim of this climate calendar is to convey the huge inequality in terms of who's responsible for climate change. So what I'm going to do is just explain what this climate calendar is and then see if you can work out where some of these countries might fall in. Basically, the idea of the climate calendar was, this is 2007, by the end of the year, this represents the total of what the average UK citizen will have produced in terms of carbon emissions by the end of the year. So it's something like 9.6 tons. Now, compare that. What I want to do is compare that to the average citizen in other countries by saying, for instance, I'm going to ask you where you think Bangladesh might fall. On that date, Bangladesh, the average person in Bangladesh will have, the average person in the UK will already have produced as many emissions as the average person in Bangladesh will in the whole of the year. So, if that makes sense, it makes more sense if you see it than me trying to explain it to you. So by the date that I want to put these post-it notes on, the average UK citizen will have produced as many, will be responsible for emitting as much carbon as the average person in each of these countries will in the whole of 2007. So, where in the 365 days of 2007 do you think that Bangladesh falls? 10th. It's not the 10th, but it is quite close. It's the 11th. Horrible as it was, the experience of flooding in the UK recently has been quite small compared to, for instance, in China at around the same time, 650 people have been killed by flooding, 450,000 homes and nearly 8 million hectares of crops were destroyed. And although flooding happens annually in China, again, the Chinese government has specifically said that it's down to climate change, they think, that has caused these particularly severe downpours. Rising sea levels is another one. The melting of mountain glaciers is another one. All those things, for instance, are going to affect Bangladesh, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. And whilst countries like Bangladesh are suffering from too much water, others are getting too little. So drought has already increased dramatically in sub-Saharan Africa, with crop yields falling as a result, affecting both food security in those countries and the ability of those countries to make money, vital for foreign revenue, on cash crops, which, like it or not, they are dependent on. So, because the global south, the poorest countries of the world, are concentrated in tropical zones, which will be the ones that are worst affected by climate change, they'll not only experience direct deaths from famine and extreme weather events, but climate change is also going to result in an intensification of poverty, and that's essentially why we're campaigning on it. You know, our prosperity, if you like, the way that we live is based on decades of overusing fossil fuels, and you know, not only is there massive inequality in emissions between rich and poor in the world, and not only will the disaster, as I've said, of climate change hit the poor far harder, but in a way it's our very prosperity directly driving that disaster for the poor. And that's why climate change, for us, you know, it's not just about it being a development issue or an environmental issue, but it's actually an urgent matter of global justice. I mean, there are people now talking about an ecological debt owed by rich countries to impoverished countries. And, you know, I think there's certainly a case for that debt to be more than just metaphorical, for rich countries to actually pay financial help for poor countries to be able to adapt to climate change. Fuels, for instance, are actually not a solution to the world's poor, as some people have been saying, both in terms of climate change and in terms of, oh, look how great it is that here's another cash crop for third world countries to grow for us. But are actually a huge problem. I mean, the first clue, I guess, is that southern movements such as Via Campesina, the global peasants' movements, are actually now saying we're not going to call them biofuels, because that's a word that's been invented by the biotech industry to make them sound lovely, and bio-life, that kind of thing. We're going to call them agrofuels to emphasise their connection to giant agribusiness, basically. I mean, basically, agrofuels are grown on large monoculture plantations that involve, for the most part, clearing peatland, like you say, or chopping down forests, or burning forests in a lot of cases. For instance, in Brazil, which is actually, for a number of years, has been a leading producer of ethanol for transport fuel, and actually in Brazil they do use it for transport fuel to some extent, a greater percent than anywhere else in the world, I think. But it mainly comes from soya and sugar cane. It's estimated that 80% of carbon dioxide emissions from Brazil are due to deforestation, and that's often, though not exclusively, down to clearing land for plantations. Similarly with the peat bogs, 87% is estimated of deforestation in Malaysia. 87% of deforestation in Malaysia was actually caused by development of oil palm plantations, which again are the fastest growing sources of biofuel. So, like you say, these all actually add to emissions. The HSBC Bank, for instance, Sky and whatever, saying they're carbon neutral companies, when actually, often, I mean, it's certainly in the case of HSBC, when they first claimed that year, their carbon emissions had actually gone up.